This is the first webinar regarding this new rule, and depending on the questions that we get after today, we may have a second webinar, or we may just send written information, depending on what works best for folks. So with that said, Kim, can you move to the next slide? So for those of you that are not familiar with MHDO, we are a state agency. We were created by the legislature in 1995. We are independent in the sense that I serve the pleasure of a board of directors and not the governor. We're not part of a larger state agency. We're considered an independent executive agency, and our board is multi-stakeholder. It consists of representatives of providers, hospitals, payers, consumers, and government. Next slide. Our purpose is to create and maintain a useful, objective, reliable, and comprehensive health information data warehouse that's used broadly to improve the health of Maine citizens and to promote transparency of the cost and quality of healthcare, including over the last 5 or 6 years. There's been more legislation passed that require us to include prescription drug cost information in our reporting. Next slide. So just for those of you, again, that might be familiar with MHDO, and for those of you that are not, MHDO today collects quite a bit of data from Maine hospitals, including inpatient and outpatient hospital encounter data. And you'll see on this slide, there's a chapter and then a number, and that's the reference to the specific rule. And we're going to show you where on our website you can find our page where all our rules are posted. Chapter 300 is our financial and organizational data that we collect from hospitals. Chapter 270 is the quality data. And now we have this new rule labeled Chapter 340, and it's specific to 340B drug program data from participating hospitals. Next slide. So the reason why we're doing this is in the last legislative session, there was a law passed, Public Law 2023, Chapter 276, an act to increase transparency regarding certain drug pricing programs. It was enacted in 2024, and it requires the MHDO to do two things. We are to collect information in a standardized format from Maine hospitals who participate in the 340B drug program, and we're required to produce a report that is a summary of the aggregate information received from hospitals, and we're required to submit that report to the Legislative Committee on Health Coverage, Insurance, and Financial Services and Maine's Office of Affordable Health Care. We'll also be posting it on our website, and you'll see at the bottom of this page, there's a new 340B webpage, and we're going to go to that in a minute. But that's where we'll be posting our reports, and there's some other information there that we'll share with you. So as a result of this new law, the Maine Health Data Organization drafted a proposed rule, and it went through a public hearing process. We collaborated with several hospitals, including the Maine Hospital Association, and proposed a rule that was eventually adopted. And the rule, again, is Chapter 340, and it's titled Uniform Reporting System for Reporting 340B Drug Program Data Sets. And it was adopted by my board at their September 5th board meeting, and it became effective September 17th. And although it's effective, the first reporting is not due until later this year, and we'll talk about timelines in a few minutes. So what I'd like to do is pause for a moment and ask if there are any questions thus far. And I would encourage folks to feel free to pop questions in the chat, and we can move along. And at the end, we can answer as many questions as we can, and we'll also follow up in writing. I don't see any questions. Sarah, Kim, do you see any?
I do not.
Okay, I'm going to move on. So I want to take you for a minute to the MHDO page on our website with the new rule. And this actually is the page on our website where all of our rules are posted. And you'll see, if you're not familiar with MHDO, that we do often have updates to rules. And essentially in government, we have to propose those changes. They go out for a public hearing. People have the opportunity to make comments on what we're proposing. And then my board ultimately has to make a decision as to whether or not to adopt what we've proposed or a revision of what we've proposed based on feedback and how we're responding to the feedback received by the public. And generally, the public is folks that are either the submitters of the data or individuals that are using the end data. And I think that's really important to underscore, and we're going to talk about that more in a minute, that we don't just collect this data and sort of stick it on a shelf. We're required to bring this data in and then produce reports on an annual basis that often help inform policy discussions at the legislative level or just externally within the market. So if we scroll down, Kim, to 340 and you click on the actual chapter, it will take you to the rule. And I won't go through this in detail today, but it would be important if you're the person or if you're forwarding this information on to a colleague that will be the person required to submit the data under this rule, it'll be important to be familiar with this chapter. And it essentially contains the provisions for filing 340B drug program data sets from the hospitals. And it includes the identification of the organizations required to register and report, the establishment of requirements for the content, format, method, and the time frame for filing this data with MHDO, the establishment of standards for the data reported, and then the compliance provisions. And so you'll see in the first part of the rule, it defines the terms that we'll use throughout the document. And Kim, if you keep scrolling down, and then you'll come to section 2 that lays out the registration and submission requirements. And we will get into this in a little more detail about what the requirements are in this first year, because the submission deadlines are different in this first year than what's in the rule, as well as registration. And if you scroll down just a little bit more, you'll see that section F starts to get into the reporting specifications. And it lays out what the hospitals are required to report. And then as you scroll down, you'll see the data element name and then a description of that data element. And if you keep scrolling down, we have provided a sample template, and I think it's just a little bit farther down. Right there. That is Appendix A. That kind of lays out in a more, I don't know, maybe user-friendly way, what the data elements that you're required to report. Now, when you actually report them, it'll probably look a little bit different than this template, but the template will give you a sense of what is described above, and maybe, again, a little more user-friendly visual. So that's the rule. And between now and when the system is open for you to actually submit the data, if you have questions, we're going to give you some contact information. And we want you to feel free to reach out to us, ask any questions. We are going to create an FAQ that we will then post on a web page that we're going to create just for those folks that are submitting this 340B data. So that'll be a page for you where you can go and find information. We'll post this deck and we'll post other, helpful information as this gets up and moving. The other piece I want to take a second and talk about before I turn this over to Kim Bonson, who will talk through some of the technical, very high level technical aspects of the reporting, is to just take a minute and talk about the report that we're required to produce that will contain aggregate information received from the hospitals. If you can click on the 340 webpage, that last link, yep. So we created this page that provides the identification of the law that requires us to post information and to collect information and report on information regarding 340B, regarding the 340B drug program. And we've gone through and looked at, and thanks to many of you that provided links for us with updated information, we went through and created a page where we've got the hospital identified and then a link to your 340B public information. And for those of you that have this information or you're working on it, and you have a link that you would like us to include on this page, please don't hesitate to forward that to us. That would be great. Folks are very interested in understanding, and that's partly why this law passed. And so what we're trying to do is say, look, there's a lot of information that's out there already regarding what the hospitals are doing with these 340B savings. And that's part of what you're required to submit under Rule 340. So anyways, just wanted to alert you to that. And also, this will be the page where we post our annual report that we're required to do on this program. All right, I think we can go back to the slide deck. And I think at this point, next slide, I am turning it over to Kim. And before I do that, were there any questions? I saw one chat. As an independent group, does anyone else have access to our data except in the aggregate published? Tim, I want to make sure I understand what you're asking. So can you come off mute?
Yeah, I was just wondering, so we're going to submit all of the information, and a lot of it has to do with how much we've paid certain contractors and stuff. So I just wanted to make sure that nothing else is going outwardly published except that giant aggregate report, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
All right. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim, and then I'll come back to close us up.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the entry page to the MHDO hospital data portal. Some of you may be familiar with this. I'd like to know of those of you attending, if you could virtually raise your hand to let us know how many are familiar with the hospital portal if you've worked in it. Or you could put in the chat if you are or not. That'll give us some idea of our audience and consider if we will send instructions via email or if it's best to do a webinar when the portal will be live. So the portal is expected to be live sometime the 1st of April. For those of you who are not familiar with the portal, what you need to do is first go to the MHDO homepage, and you will see up at the top navigation, we have a link for the hospital data portal. So that is how you will get there. And you will see the login screen. Now, those of you that are hospital financial data submitters at this time, the username and password are the same for the 340B access. So you will be all set. When you do log in, you'll see that you'll have a new link on the left-hand side under your financial hospital data. There'll be one for Chapter 340 drug program data. For those of you who have, who will not be submitting the data, I'm sorry, for those of you who are not currently hospital financial data submitters. You will need to contact our help desk, and we'll have some information at the end of the slide for how best to contact them. And you'll need to let them know that you need a username and password to submit the Chapter 340 data. And also make sure you let them know which hospital or hospitals you will be submitting the data for. And then you'll receive an email with a username and temporary password, and that should be it. If any of you that do have a username and password right now, due to hospital financial data, if you've forgotten any of that, you can do your recover an existing account. So the most important thing coming out of today, I shouldn't say the most important, but the first thing you should do after this meeting is to determine who will be submitting the data, this data for your hospital, so that March 21st, we'd like to have all the users set up to enter the portal. We don't, just run much smoother if we have the information ahead of time. Now, I just wanted to let you know what you can briefly expect when the portal does go live. Basically, you'll log in. There'll be the Chapter 340 link on the side, and you will choose which fiscal year you'll be submitting the data for. And basically, the portal will be set up to ask the same, to ask questions that are the same on the Appendix A in Rule Chapter 340, which we showed you earlier, and you can find on our home page. Again, you'll also, on the left-hand nav, as usual, there'll be the FAQ that we'll create from your questions. There'll be a user manual and a recording of this webinar in the portal, as well as the on our MHDO home site that will let you know in the next communication. Any questions before I turn it back over to Carolee? Okay.
All right, hearing none. Thanks, Kim.
You're welcome.
So if we go to the next slide. So the first annual submission of this data is, as I said, it will not line up with what the rule requires, because for the first year, we've obviously passed the October 31st and the December 31st and March 31st. Well, not March yet. I know time is going by fast, but not that fast. So October and December we've gone by. So for the fiscal year end dates, which it looks like we've got essentially 4 fiscal year end dates with all the hospitals in the state: April, June, September, and December. So for all of the folks that are a fiscal year end date of April, June, and September, you need to submit your fiscal year 24 340 data by June 30th of 2025. And again, we're going to get into the steps that will happen, between now and that date. We will notify you when the portal is ready. And as Kim said, we'll either be providing written instructions or hold a second webinar to actually walk you through, submitting in the portal. And I couldn't tell because my screen had something else on it, but are folks that are on this call, is there anybody that's not familiar with MHDO's hospital portal? So I'm going to say silence is people are familiar with it, because it will be a lot easier, I guess, so to speak, if you're familiar with it. If not, no worries, we can help folks walk through it. And instead of doing a webinar, we may just do some one-on-one calls if that's easier. Okay, so then after the first year, then we will revert back to the timeline described in the rule. And it follows, if you're familiar with the filing of the hospital financial data, it follows the same filing deadlines as Chapter 300's financial data. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. So as Kim said, what we were hoping to accomplish out of this call is, one, bring your attention to the specific regulation and just have you start looking at that to determine who will submit the data in your organization. And if the person reporting has a user ID and password for the financial data portal, there's no need for you to take any action at the moment. If not, you do need to contact our help desk. We're suggesting that you do it by March 21st to request a user ID and password. We are anticipating that in April of this year, the portal will be open for your fiscal year 24 submissions. We'll contact all of you prior to that date to let you know that the portal is available, and we'll provide instructions. So it is important, if you're not the person, if you could email us who the person is within your organization, we'll make sure that the communication gets to the appropriate folks. June 30th is the due date for that first year of reporting. And again, it's based on fiscal year 2024. And the instructions regarding the annual registration and reporting will be emailed to our contacts. Part of the registration process is making sure that the person that's responsible for this reporting is identified as such. So again, all future communications are going to the right individual. And I think we can go to the next slide. And here are some important contact information for questions about user ID and passwords. You'll see our help desk. You can reach in 3 different ways. And then if you have any questions regarding the requirements, Deborah Dodge, and I think many of you might be familiar with Deb. She leads our financial and org data requirements. You'll see her contact information as well. And we'll post this deck on MHDO's website on a page, again, that will be set up just for 340 submitters. So I'm going to stop there. Again, I know this was a quick call, but it was really just to bring your attention to the regulation and to provide the time frames and the way in which you'll be submitting data. If they're in the contact information for if you have questions or you need to get a username or password. And again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. I know this is a lot of information, so I'll just ask one last time before we disengage. If there are any questions.
Hey, I have a question. This is Matt Marston from Northern Light Health. These submitters of hospital data frequently are not the same as those that administer the 340B program for the hospital. So I just wanted to validate that our next step would be to call and request access to Chapter 340 for all of our 340B covered entity hospitals. And it doesn't have to be the same person that submits the financial data for that hospital.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, hearing none. I know you're all busy, so we won't drag this on. Thank you very much for your time and your attention to this new requirement. We will, as I said, be posting the report, and we'll make sure that that the submitters are aware when the reports are posted. They'll be up on the website, but we will draw your attention to that. I think it's important to understand again that we don't just collect this data, that it is being reported and that you have the opportunity to take a look at that. So with that said, thank you, and we'll be in touch soon.